On Friday, SZA dropped her long-awaited project, Lana, the deluxe to her smash hit 2022 album, SOS. Most fans were super excited to get some new SZA music that's been teased for a long time, even if they had to wait a little bit longer than they were expecting to, because the release didn't come out at midnight, it came out at 3 p.m. EST. By all accounts, it's another really solid entry to SZA's discography. There's a Kendrick Lamar appearance. My personal favorites from the first listen were Chill Baby, Kitchen, and Drive, but again, I'm gonna have to go back a couple more times before I can really tell you how I feel. But my first reaction was like, this is good stuff. But not all fans were saying positive things on social media. It's not that there was a lot of negativity, but there was a lot of confusion. How exactly is this a deluxe album? It's 15 new songs, which is more than long enough to be its own new release. There were some more positive takes about that, like what the excellent Elsie had to say. This could have stood alone as its own album. But others had a little bit more spice in their comments. If you're gonna drop 15 songs after 2 years since the original album came out, you could have just dropped it as a new album. This just doesn't make any sense to be a deluxe. Now, SZA is not the only artist to play around with what exactly the deluxe format means. But it is true, like if you were an alien placed on Earth, and your mission was to understand what the deluxe album meant, and you had to go artist by artist to see that, you're gonna have a really tough time figuring it out. For some artists, it's just one song. Maybe not even a new song, but an alternate cover, or just like a remix. And for others, it can be basically an entirely new album that could have stood on its own without the deluxe tag. For some artists, it drops at the same time as the standard album. For some, it's a couple days later, and then for others, it can be as long as a decade after. So in this video, I'm gonna try my best to figure out what the hell the deluxe album even means anymore. To do that, we're gonna have to understand where the term comes from in the first place, and then look at how artists use it today and figure out, does this still make sense? And along the way, I think we're gonna understand why SZA released Lana the way that she did. So let's get into it. But before we do all that, if you like videos on music like this, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. I post a video every week, and if you want to see them early, go to my Instagram, HADJI Gaviota, throw me a follow, and join my broadcast channel. I post all my videos in that channel one day early. Also want to say thanks to everybody who's checked out my album Gut Punch. It came out earlier this month. I have a new music video dropping on Wednesday for the song Moi. Cause I like y'all, I'm putting the unlisted link in the description if you want to check it out a little bit early. I've still got some merch left over from the album too, super high quality stuff. I'm gonna put the link to that in the description. If you got any holiday money left over, you know. And last but not least, I'm working on new music already. I should have something dropping very soon in January. And I've also been working on a really super secret special project for the past year or so, and I'm gonna be rolling that out in 2025, maybe even in January. So stay tuned, let's get back to the video. To understand why artists keep using the deluxe album format, we're gonna need to understand where it comes from in the first place. LeBron James tried to convince us that he invented the deluxe album a couple years ago when he was A&Ring for 2 Chainz. But as fun of an answer as that would be, the deluxe album has been around for long before that. So let me get into my history teacher bag here for a second. The deluxe album is a vestigial concept. Vestigial means something that is a remnant of a time when it used to have a specific function and meaning. So back in the day, when people used to actually buy physical music like CDs or vinyl, deluxe editions of albums were actually physically different from the standard versions. Maybe they had a few bonus tracks tacked on at the end, or they had an alternate cover. Take, for example, a more recent album from the tail end of when people actually still bought CDs, Drake's Nothing Was the Same in 2013. The standard cover is Drake as a baby facing towards the right, and then the deluxe cover is Drake in 2013 facing towards the left. The deluxe version also has a couple extra tracks, Come Through and All Me. Come Through is one of the best songs on that album to me, by the way, so this is the canon version in my head. So when music was an actual physical product, it made sense for there to be different editions of a release. It's like a book. There's so many different versions of the most popular books, right? Why wouldn't it be the same with CDs? Sometimes they were released concurrently, like the Nothing Was the Same Deluxe. The deluxe and the regular version came out on the same day. Sometimes they did country exclusives. For example, the Japanese version of Kanye West's 2007 album Graduation had 2 bonus tracks at the end, Good Night and Bittersweet Poetry. Now, as a kid who had the Graduation CD in the car and grew up listening to it front to back, finding out on the internet a couple years later that there were 2 more songs was a very exciting experience. But without even leaving the country, some artists would do store-specific versions. It's still something that happens today. For example, the Bleachers album that came out this year had a Target exclusive CD that had 4 extra bonus tracks on it. But this was also a super common thing when CDs were the #1 way to get music. At other times, the deluxe versions that artists would drop would be re-releases. For example, when the CD was invented in the early 1980s, there were so many artists with popular albums from before the CD who then had to re-release their music from the 70s and the 60s and the 50s onto CD format so that people could listen to it in their CD players, in their cars. Bands like Led Zeppelin released box sets of their old material, with some of the songs getting remastered so that they sounded a little better, and some bands put old unreleased material in there as well to kind of sweeten the pot. Because remember, you had to convince the consumer to go and buy an album that they already owned on another format, so you had to make it worth their while. That's really the origin of the deluxe album as we know it. To leave the world of music for a sec, a lot of diners, at least in the United States, will have burgers or sandwiches that have deluxe options. You know, maybe they come with fries, maybe they come with extra toppings, coleslaw, a pickle. Deluxe albums were originally meant to be the music version of that. As LeBron put it so perfectly,
you know what? Here go 2 more for y'all.
But today, the deluxe album is different for a few different reasons. One is that the vast majority of music ends up in the exact same place, on DSPs, or digital service providers for people who aren't nerdy enough about music distribution to know what the industry term for things like Spotify, Apple Music, and Tidal are. If all the albums are going on Spotify, be it the standard version and the deluxe version, then what exactly is the difference? The consumer isn't sitting in front of a rack of CDs trying to decide if they want to pay $12 for the standard version or $15 for the deluxe version. If they're both posted on the same site at no additional cost, then it kind of makes the regular version redundant. This explains why deluxe versions tend not to release at the exact same time as standard versions anymore. For some artists, the release of the deluxe will come just a couple days after the release of the standard version, because the first week sales and streams are still being calculated within that first week of release. And so dropping something in the middle of the week will give those numbers a little bit of a boost and get people to go back to the project and listen again, which hopefully for the artist will increase their first week sales number. 21 Savage's 2018 album I Am I Was released on December 21st, 2018, and the deluxe album was released on December 24th, just 3 days later. This is within the same sales period. And for artists where streams are making up most of their first week units, which is most artists who aren't selling bundles or getting people to buy physical copies of their CDs, this is a strategy to grab more numbers. The album, which I've never had to say the name out loud before, but apparently is supposed to be pronounced I Am Greater Than I Was, which makes sense, did 131,000 units in its first week, and only 18,000 of those units were from actual album sales or digital downloads, which means the rest of it is coming from streams. The deluxe version only tacks on one more song, but it was a remix featuring Travis Scott, who was on fire at that time coming off of Astroworld. So that really makes sense as something that will reignite interest in an album within that first week's release. Some artists will space out their deluxe versions by a little bit to keep more heat on a still recently released project. For example, Glorilla's album Glorious came out on October 11th of 2024, and the deluxe version, which she called the bonus track edition, dropped on October 23rd. That's not within the first week in terms of counting for Billboard. But as fans become more literate with the charts and care more and more about artists' album sales, of which I'm not particularly a fan of, but what can I do? Some artists want to save their deluxe for the second or third week because fans know that first week sales will drop dramatically and they want to make fun of the artist when they see those numbers. So they pace out their deluxe projects to avoid that happening to them. The absolute other side of the deluxe album spectrum is somebody like J. Cole, who just released 8 bonus tracks for his album 2014 Forest Hills Drive, which, as you can tell from the album title, came out in 2014. 10 years later, for the anniversary, he popped back up with 8 new songs, which is damn near a whole album, and it's all unreleased material from that era. At first, he dropped those songs through a site called Even, which lets artists put music up for sale, and gives fans an app so that they can download it and listen to it themselves. So for a couple weeks, this deluxe was locked behind a paywall that only diehard fans would go and buy. But this past Friday, after his big 10-year anniversary concert and his audio series finished, he dropped them on DSPs for everybody. But it's a good example of a deluxe album being more fan service focused and maybe not like a part of the original marketing plan for the album. And that concept of deluxe albums being fan service is not new, but it is kind of different from the way that most artists are using the format. Take Charli XCX for example, who saved some big bullets for her album Brat when she dropped the deluxe, and also fitted into the album's format by kind of making fun of the deluxe album concept, and called it Brat and it's the same but there's 3 more songs so it's not. And if that wasn't enough, a couple months later, she dropped Brat and it's completely different but it's still Brat, which is a remix album, which is kind of like the half sibling of a deluxe album. And none of these versions were strictly limited to being things that only like diehard Charli fans would enjoy. For example, on the deluxe album, she introduced the song Guess, which eventually got a Billie Eilish remix and is now her most popular song from the album. And some of the other guests from the remix album are like Lorde and Ariana Grande. You know, these are big superstars. Like, the point is reach. Like, you want to reach more and more people, you want to do big numbers. And diehard Charli fans who have been following her since Vroom Vroom, like they're still gonna like it. It's just maybe not necessarily only for them. It's all a part of the reach of the Brat era, which on this channel I've covered 1,000 times. I'm sorry, it's just a big story this year, and I promise I'm not on their payroll. Forget about remixes and extensions. For some artists, the Deluxe is an entirely new album. Lil Uzi Vert had one of the most memorable versions of this when he dropped the Deluxe to his album Eternal A Take back in 2020, which he also titled Lil Uzi Vert vs. the World 2. It came 1 week later after the original Eternal A Take, and it was another 14 songs, many of which were leaks or snippets that fans had been begging for on social media. It was marketed as a deluxe, but one could say it's basically kind of like a double album, just spaced out 1 week apart. Future did something similar on paper in 2017 when he dropped his self-titled album Future, and then a week later dropped a whole other album called Hendrix that had kind of a different sound to it. If he had called Hendrix the Future Deluxe in 2017, people would have been like, that's kind of weird, I've never seen anybody do that. But after Uzi did it in 2020 and you see people like SZA do that, it's kind of not that weird anymore. The Uzi example is also interesting because in a way the Eternal A Take Deluxe is kind of still fan service even though it's a whole new album, because it's like specifically songs that people have been asking for. It's actually very similar to what SZA had with Lana. So sometimes the Deluxe is fan service, sometimes it's a whole new thing, and sometimes it's kind of both. The question that so many people are asking though is, if a Deluxe is basically a whole new album, like it was for SZA and like it was for Uzi, then why wouldn't an artist just make it its own album? What's the benefit to marketing this whole new project as a Deluxe album? One of the answers is that when you drop a new project, especially as a bigger artist, fans have a lot of expectations for the era that comes around it. At this point, going purely by albums to understand an artist's career and their impact is kind of limiting. It's no longer fully representative of the fan experience. We need to look at things as eras. Not just the songs on the album, but the tours, the music videos. There are artists who go out of their way to put on a whole new character for an album experience, like Tyler the Creator did with Igor, or like The Weeknd did with After Hours. You're building an entire world, and the album is the centerpiece. It's the thing that everything in the world orbits around. But there are a lot of other planets in that solar system that you gotta look at to fully appreciate the album. So sometimes the Deluxe just becomes an excuse to get some more music out without all of those expectations. Let's take Baby Keem's Deluxe for the Melodic Blue. It was a full year after the original album and it had 7 new tracks on it. Maybe a bit short to be a full project, but that's pretty close. Kanye used to drop those 7-track albums. I've got a 7-track album. It happens. Maybe he doesn't want to go shoot new cover art, come up with a whole new name, do all these crazy music videos, or just do too much. So he can just call it the Melodic Blue Deluxe and just put it out there. The same logic can be applied to someone like SZA, who's calling Lana the Deluxe to SOS. It can't be easy doing a whole new full rollout after doing a worldwide tour, bunch of music videos from the standard edition. So she just put on a little bug costume, she called up Ben Stiller for a music video, and she called it a day, at least to this point. We can even dissect that stuff that she's done for Lana and see how it could have been optimized so that SZA didn't have to do too much. Like 80% of the Drive music video is Ben Stiller driving and singing the song. Only at the end do we see SZA in her bug costume. But you'll also note that this very well could be the exact location that they shot the album cover. So conceivably, all of this could have been shot on SZA's end in one day. And it's not just about the creative energy that it takes to build a world, but it's also about the budget for putting together a whole rollout. This probably doesn't apply as much to incredibly successful and probably rich artists like SZA. But for other artists, like your fans want music, but the label's like, we've made this much, we've spent this much, I don't know if we really got it to do all of that for you right now. So artists will call something a deluxe so that they can sneak out some more songs for their fans, but maybe have a less average spend per song in terms of music videos or just general creative. Those things are really, really, really expensive. And in theory, the fans shouldn't feel away if SZA had a lighter workload, or if the label invested less money into it. They get the new music that they've been begging for. And maybe it doesn't come with all the bells and whistles, but I'm sure a lot of them aren't complaining about that. The other elephant in the room in this aspect that can't be ignored is that by tacking on 15 songs to an already massively successful album, SZA will be able to bump up some of the RIAA certifications that will come along with that album, the golds and the platinums. And the diamonds. She's talking diamonds, I think, here. SOS, the album, was already platinum. A bunch of the individual tracks are platinum and gold too. But having a whole second wind of streams and sales will only push that album further into the stratosphere. It's another consideration for artists who are on the commercial level of success that SZA is. This is not a conversation for everybody, but once you're one of those big dogs, this is something that people are thinking about. But so, are these artists using the word deluxe wrong? By the actual definition of the word, Absolutely. According to Merriam-Webster, deluxe means notably luxurious, elegant, or expensive. The old deluxe CDs that you would see in stores, right next to the standard editions, were at least more expensive. You could argue about whether or not they were more luxurious if you liked the cover more than the other one. You know, things like luxurious and elegant are kind of subjective. Expensive, you know, it's either cheaper or it's not. But nowadays, that's not a thing because most consumers of music are just paying a one-time fee per month to access all the music in the world, including the standard and the deluxe versions of both albums. So the versions cost the same, which is nothing on top of what they're already paying for. Unless they're diehard fans who are buying merch bundles that come with physical music. So these quote-unquote deluxe versions on streaming services don't seem particularly luxurious, elegant, or expensive. But just because it doesn't fit the English definition of the word, doesn't mean that these releases aren't at least kind of honoring the spirit of the original deluxe album. One of the coolest things about the English language is how much it changes and evolves over time according to how we use it. If I time traveled to 2019, 5 years ago from today, and I said, Hawk Tuah Girl did a crypto rug pull on X, the Everything app, I think somebody would shoot me in the head. And I think that the deluxe, at the end of the day, is a concept that kind of means like bonus, extra. A bonus is gonna look a lot different depending on who the artist is and what the original thing is. For some artists, that bonus is one song, maybe even just one remix, maybe even just a different cover. For others like SZA and Uzi, it can be an entirely new project. At the end of the day, new music is new music. And I think some artists and their teams are starting to sense a little bit of fatigue with the whole like expected deluxe album concept. And so they've started branding it differently. It has gotten to the point where people expect it. Like one of the first things that people said after Kendrick surprise released GNX was, I think there's a deluxe coming. Like they weren't even really done like dissecting the first album. They were like, where is the deluxe? Waiter, bring me more albums. So I've noticed some artists have been kind of playing with the branding of the concept of the deluxe album. Saw Baby's deluxe for his recent album Saheem just dropped on Friday. And it has 2 new songs, but instead of just calling it Saheem Deluxe, he called it Saheem a little bit more. When Tyler the Creator dropped the deluxe-ish project for his 2021 album Call Me If You Get Lost, he called it the estate sale instead of just calling it a deluxe, and he kind of made it feel like a whole little experience. Artists who are good at branding will find ways to brand the deluxe concept in ways that just don't feel like a lazily slapped on title. Since fans care about first week sales now, even though I personally think it's a silly thing to care about, they're also hyper aware of the tactics that artists are using in order to increase those sales. So when the deluxe feels like something that's just done to do that, maybe some fans are gonna feel a type of way, even if they are getting a little bit new music. Or the worst case is artists are saving some of the good songs and then releasing kind of a mid project so that the deluxe will be better. That's just backwards thinking to me. That's not fan first to me. And all of this can be avoided with a little bit of strategic thinking and a fan first approach. And that's how we ended up with Lana, which is a new album that's kind of not a new album, but it's definitely new music. It's confusing, it's a little silly, and it's based off something that worked in a system that no longer exists anymore. But alas, it's new music for the fans. And in SZA's case, a lot of new music. So there's really no reason to complain in my eyes. What do you think? Are you tired of the deluxe album format? Is it fun when artists do it in a cool way? Are you just happy to be getting new music? Who cares? What should I cover next? Let me know. Happy holidays. Peace.